An event that changed Canada, an event that altered the course of history, an event that made national news. But why? How did a man completely unknown to the world make national news and is now, unfortunately, a household name in Canada? In this video, I'll be breaking down how the killing of Robert Dziekański affected the police force in Canada. The killing of Robert Dziekański occurred on October 14, 2007 at Vancouver International Airport in British Columbia, Canada. Robert Dziekański was killed by 4 RCMP officers. The officers used a taser several times on Dziekański, which was the contributing factor to his death. The incident was captured on video by a bystander and sparked widespread controversy and calls for police reform. The 4 police officers, Monty Robertson and Queese Millington, Bill Bentley, and Jerry Rundle were all involved in the act. The whole incident lasted for approximately 50 seconds from the time the RCMP officers first approached Dziekański until he was subdued and handcuffed. According to the testimony of the officers involved, they did not take any steps to de-escalate the situation before using the taser on Dziekański. The officers also did not provide any first aid to Dziekański after he was subdued, despite the fact that he was clearly injured and in distress. This was considered as an inadequate response by the public and the investigation team. Dziekański was reportedly acting erratically and throwing furniture in the international arrivals area. The officer claims that Dziekański was combative and refused to comply with their commands, leading them to use the taser to subdue him, and was not given sufficient time to comply with the officer's commands before he was tased. Due to all of the public outrage and people searching for change, the RCMP changed their policies for the use of tasers and implemented new training for their officers on how to deal with individuals in emotional distress. This includes providing officers with additional training in de-escalation techniques and the importance of providing first aid after use of force. The incident also led to changes in the way in which the use of force is reported and investigated. The British Columbian Independent Investigation Office was created to conduct independent investigations of police incidents involving death or serious harm. This provides oversight and investigations of incidents involving police officers that ensure that the public trust the RCMP. Additionally, the incident led to discussions and calls for more diversity in the police force and more cultural sensitivity training for officers. For the training aspect, one of the major changes that came out from the incident was the changes in training of police officers. The RCMP implemented new training for their officers on how to deal with individuals in emotional distress. This includes providing officers with additional training in de-escalation techniques and the importance of providing first aid after use of force. The force also introduced more cultural sensitivity training for officers. The incident also led to changes in the way the RCMP interacts with the public. The force increased its efforts to improve its relationship with the public and increase transparency and accountability. An autopsy showed there were no significant injuries and no natural diseases would have likely led to sudden death. The pathologist concluded that most likely the cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia during restraint and noted that the mechanism in such case is not well understood. Cardiac arrhythmia in the presence of a physical altercation and multiple deployments of conducted energy weapons. They classified his death as a homicide. These are some of the recommendations that were made by the coroner's report in order to prevent similar tragic incidents from happening in the future. Improved training for police officers on how to deal with individuals in a state of agitation, including those who may be experiencing mental health crisis. The development of guidelines and protocols for the use of tasers by police officers, including the requirement to provide medical attention immediately after the use of a taser. The establishment of a dedicated mental health crisis team to respond to calls involving individuals in a state of agitation or mental health crisis. The provision of language assistance for non-English speaking individuals in order to facilitate communication and prevent confusion and agitation. The requirement for police officers to be trained in de-escalation techniques and crisis intervention strategies to prevent the use of force where possible. The requirement for police officers to be trained in cultural competency to better understand and respond to the needs of diverse communities. The requirements for police officers to have regular sociological assessments to assure that they are fit to perform these duties. These recommendations aim to improve the transparency, accountability, and safety in police interactions with the public and prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. There's so much traction on this topic that a public provincial inquiry was held in British Columbia led by Thomas Braidwood. The public inquiry was ordered by the British Columbian government and was tasked with investigating the actions of the RCMP officers involved in the incident, and as well as the policies and procedures that led to the death of Dziekański. The inquiry lasted for several months and heard from a wide range of witnesses, including the officers involved, experts on the use of tasers, and representatives from the RCMP. The inquiry made several recommendations, including police officers are trained to use the minimum amount of force necessary. Police officers are trained to de-escalate situations. That tasers should only be used in situations where an officer is facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. Police officers are required to provide first aid after using force. That the use of force is reported and investigated in a consistent and transparent manner. And that the RCMP should improve its policies, procedures, to ensure that officers are held accountable for their actions. Additionally, the inquiry also found that the officers' use of force was not justifiable and that Dziekański did not pose an imminent threat to the officers' health. Two of the RCMP officers involved in the incident involving the death of Robert Dziekański in 2007, Quis Millington and Gary Rundle, were charged with perjury in relation to their testimony at the public inquiry into the incident. They were both found guilty in 2015, and Millington was sentenced to 30 months in prison while Rundle was sentenced to house arrest. The guilty verdicts and sentences imposed on the officers were seen as a step towards holding the officers accountable for their actions. In summary, the killing of Robert Dziekański at Vancouver International Airport in British Columbia, Canada, by 4 RCMP officers led to widespread public outrage and calls for police reform. The incident was captured on video and showed the officers using a taser excessively on Dziekański several times and leaving him on the ground without providing any medical assistance. The incident led to several investigations and inquiries, including a public inquiry led by Thomas Braidwood, which made recommendations for changes in police training and tactics, particularly regarding the use of force. 2 of the officers, involving Quis Millington and Gary Rundle, were charged with perjury in relation to their testimony at the public inquiry and were found guilty. The incident and subsequent trials had a significant impact on the RCMP, leading to calls for reform and changes in the way the force operates.